The Exilari Empire was one of the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy. Their warriors were strong, their technology advanced, and their pride unmatched. Among them was Princess Varel, the daughter of the High King. She was respected, admired, and feared. She was also known for one thing: her deep hatred for humans. For years, the Exilari had looked down upon humans, considering them weak and unworthy of standing among great alien races. Varel believed this more than anyone. To her, humans were fragile, short-lived creatures who lacked honor and strength. She had never met a human in person, and she had no desire to. But destiny had other plans. The royal palace of Silara Prime was bustling with activity. Today was an important day. A human ambassador was arriving to strengthen diplomatic ties between Earth and the Exilari Empire. The High King had agreed to peace talks, but Varel saw no point in it. She stood on the balcony, watching as the human starship landed in the royal courtyard. A group of humans stepped out, led by a tall man in a dark uniform. His name was Commander Elias Carter, a decorated officer from the United Earth Federation. He had been sent to represent humanity in the negotiations. Unlike the other humans, who looked nervous in the presence of Silari warriors, Elias stood confidently, his sharp blue eyes scanning his surroundings. Varel narrowed her eyes. Arrogant, just like she expected. Inside the grand hall, the meeting began. The High King sat on his throne, his expression calm but unreadable. Varel stood beside him, arms crossed, listening as the humans spoke about trade agreements, alliances, and peace. Elias Carter spoke with calm confidence, never once showing fear or hesitation. Humanity is not as weak as many believe, he said. We may not have the strength of Silari warriors, but we have survived against impossible odds. We seek peace, not war. But make no mistake, we will not be looked down upon. Varel smirked. Bold words for a human. She leaned forward and spoke for the first time. Your kind barely survived their own wars. You lack discipline, honor, and strength. What could the Exilari possibly gain from an alliance with you? Her voice was sharp, challenging. Elias didn't flinch. He simply met her gaze. Survival. The room fell silent. Even the Exilari generals shifted uncomfortably. Varel clenched her fists, annoyed that a human dared to speak to her like an equal. Before she could respond, an alarm blared through the palace. Red warning lights flashed. A guard ran in, his face pale. We are under attack. Explosions shook the palace as the Draxar, a rival alien faction, launched a surprise assault. They had broken through the planetary defenses, their ships now firing upon the royal city. Guards rushed to protect the royal family, but the Draxar warriors were already inside. Blaster fire echoed through the halls. The palace was turning into a battlefield. Varel drew her energy blade, ready to fight. She had faced many enemies before, and she feared none of them. But this attack was different. They were targeting her specifically. She fought fiercely, cutting down Draxar soldiers with precise strikes. But even she couldn't fight an entire army alone. More and more Draxar surrounded her, and for the first time in her life, she realized she was outnumbered. Then suddenly, a shot fired past her head, striking a Draxar warrior behind her. Varel turned to see Elias Carter holding a blaster, his stance steady, his expression unreadable. We need to move, he said. Now. Varel's pride screamed at her to refuse help from a human. But as the palace walls shook under heavy fire, she knew she had no choice. For the first time, Princess Varel had to trust a human with her life. The palace burned. Smoke filled the grand halls as explosions rocked the walls. The Draxar warriors, ruthless and heavily armed, pushed deeper into the royal city. Their goal was clear: capture Princess Varel. She had fought many battles before, but this time she was outnumbered. Her energy blade hummed as she struck down another Draxar soldier, but more of them kept coming. Beside her, Elias Carter fired his blaster with precise shots. covering her as they retreated down the corridor. Virel hated this situation, relying on a human for survival. But she had no choice. "Princess, we need to move," Elias said, reloading his weapon. Virel glared at him, but nodded. She hated to admit it, but the human was fighting well. He wasn't like the weaklings she had imagined. They ran through the corridors, the sound of battle echoing behind them. Virel activated a hidden passage, a narrow hallway leading to an underground chamber. Only the royal family knew about it. Elias raised an eyebrow. "Secret tunnels. You Tsilari really do live like royalty." Virel ignored his comment. "Stay close, human. If you get lost, I won't come back for you." Elias smirked. "Noted." As they moved deeper into the tunnel, the noise of battle faded, but Virel knew they weren't safe yet. The chamber they entered was dimly lit, filled with ancient Tsilari artifacts and weapons. Virel touched a control panel, activating a holographic map. She pointed at a hidden hangar outside the city walls. "There, we escaped through this route." Elias studied the map. "If we reach that hangar, we can contact my ship in orbit. We'll have backup." Virel crossed her arms. "I don't need human backup." Elias met her gaze. "And yet, here we are, fighting side by side." She clenched her fists but didn't argue. Right now, survival was more important than her pride. Suddenly, a loud explosion shook the underground chamber. The walls cracked, and dust rained down from the ceiling. Virel's eyes widened. The Draxar had found them. A massive figure stepped into the chamber, a Draxar captain, twice the size of a human, his armor glowing red. He held a heavy blaster in one hand and a plasma axe in the other. "You cannot run, princess," the captain growled. "Surrender, and your life will be spared." Virel gripped her energy blade tighter. "I do not surrender." The Draxar captain chuckled. "Foolish." He raised his blaster, but before he could fire, Elias shot first. The blaster bolt hit the captain's shoulder, forcing him to step back. "Go," Elias shouted. "I'll cover you." Virel hesitated. The human was buying her time. "Don't be stupid, human," she snapped. "Just move." Elias fired again. Virel cursed under her breath but ran towards the exit, knowing that for the first time in her life, she wasn't fighting alone. The underground chamber shook violently as explosions echoed through the tunnels. Dust rained from the ceiling, and the walls cracked under the impact. The Draxar were closing in. Princess Virel dashed through the narrow passage, her heart pounding. Behind her, Elias Carter fired his blaster, covering their escape. The Draxar captain roared in anger, charging after them. Virel gritted her teeth. This was humiliating. She, a Tsilari warrior, was running with a human. But she had no choice, not if she wanted to survive. They emerged into a hidden chamber, a massive underground hangar filled with old Tsilari ships. The ancient vessels were covered in dust, unused for decades. Elias glanced at the ships and whistled. "Looks like we found our way out." Virel ran to a control panel, her fingers flying across the screen. The hangar doors groaned as they slowly began to open. Moonlight poured in, revealing a dark canyon beyond. "We take the fastest one," she said, pointing at a sleek black ship near the exit. Elias nodded and sprinted toward it. But before they could reach the ramp, boom, the hangar door behind them exploded, and the Draxar captain stepped through the smoke, his plasma axe glowing red. "You cannot escape, princess," he growled. "You belong to us now." Virel spun, gripping her energy blade. "I belong to no one." She lunged at the captain, her blade clashing against his axe. Sparks flew as they fought, each strike sending shockwaves through the hangar. Virel was fast, but the captain was strong, blocking her attacks with brutal force. Elias raised his blaster, aiming for the captain's head, but the Draxar moved too quickly, knocking the weapon out of his hands with a powerful swing. "Human," Virel shouted, "get to the ship." I'm not leaving you behind. Elias shot back. Do as I say, she yelled, ducking as the captain swung his axe at her head. Elias hesitated, then rushed toward the ship, activating the engines. The ship roared to life, its thrusters shaking the ground. Virel dodged another attack, her breathing heavy. She needed to end this. Now. With a sudden move, she twisted her body, using the captain's momentum against him. As he swung his axe down, she sidestepped and drove her blade straight into his side. The Draxar roared in pain, stumbling backward. Virel didn't wait. She turned and sprinted toward the ship. Elias was already in the cockpit. Get in, he shouted. Virel leaped onto the ramp, just as the ship lifted off the ground. The moment she was inside, Elias hit the thrusters, and they shot out of the hangar into the night sky. High-speed pursuit. Alarms blared in the cockpit. Draxar ships were in pursuit. We've got company, Elias warned, gripping the controls. Virel jumped into the co-pilot seat, scanning the radar. 5 enemy fighters. They won't let us escape that easily. Elias smirked. Then let's make them work for it. He yanked the controls, sending the ship into a steep dive through the canyon. The Draxar ships followed, their lasers cutting through the night sky. Virel activated the ship's weapons, locking onto the nearest enemy. Firing. A blast of energy shot from the cannons, striking the enemy ship. It exploded in a bright flash. Nice shot, Elias said. Virel didn't reply. She was too focused on survival. Elias weaved through the canyon, dodging enemy fire with expert precision. But the Draxar were relentless. A missile locked onto them, closing in fast. Brace yourself, Elias yelled. Virel's eyes flashed. Not yet. She waited until the last moment, then flipped a switch, releasing a cluster of flares. The missile veered off course and exploded behind them. That was risky, Elias muttered. Virel smirked. I knew it would work. Elias shook his head but kept flying. Only 2 enemy ships remained. We're almost out of the atmosphere, he said. Once we break free, we can jump to light speed. Virel took aim at another Draxar fighter. Not if they destroy us first. She fired. The blast hit the enemy's wing, sending it spinning out of control before it crashed into the canyon wall. 1 left, Elias muttered. But before they could attack, the last Draxar ship fired a direct hit. The cockpit shook violently. Warning lights flashed. We lost the left thruster. Elias cursed. We won't make it to orbit. Virel's eyes darted to the radar. A spaceport lay just beyond the canyon. Land there, she ordered. Elias didn't argue. He gritted his teeth and guided the damaged ship toward the landing platform. The last Draxar fighter followed them, guns blazing. Virel grabbed the ship's turret controls, aiming directly at the enemy. Not this time. She fired. The shot hit dead center, and the Draxar ship exploded in midair. Elias crash-landed onto the platform, sparks flying as the ship skidded to a stop. For a moment, there was only silence. Then Elias let out a breath. Well, that could have gone worse. Virel glared at him. We are not safe yet, human. Elias chuckled. You can call me Elias, you know. Virel turned away, pretending not to hear. She would never admit it, but this human had just saved her life. And something told her this was only the beginning. The ship lay in ruins on the spaceport platform, smoke rising from its damaged thrusters. Sparks flickered from the control panels, and warning lights flashed across the cockpit. Elias groaned, unstrapping himself from the seat. Well, that was fun, he muttered. Virel shot him an annoyed look. We barely survived, human. This is not fun. Elias smirked. You could at least say my name. Virel ignored him and checked the scanners. The Draxar ship had been destroyed, but that didn't mean they were safe. If the Draxar had tracked them this far, more would come soon. We need to leave, she said firmly. Elias raised an eyebrow. You see any other ships around here? Because I don't. Virel didn't reply. She was already stepping out of the ship onto the landing platform, scanning the surroundings. The spaceport looked abandoned. Old cargo containers were stacked in corners, and rusted fuel tanks sat unused. But something felt off. Elias followed, stretching his arms. So, what now, princess? Got a secret army waiting for us. She shot him a glare. Do not call me that. Elias grinned. All right, your highness. Before she could snap back, a sound echoed from the shadows. A deep mechanical hum, like energy weapons charging up. Virel's grip tightened on her blade. We are not alone. A dangerous welcome. From behind the crates, figures emerged. Tall, armored, and carrying weapons. Their eyes glowed red in the dim light. Elias whistled. Well, that's not good. Virel recognized them instantly. Mercenaries. Ruthless, lawless, and always looking for a profit. A large figure stepped forward. His armor was scratched but strong, and a heavy plasma rifle rested on his shoulder. He studied them with amusement. Didn't expect visitors tonight, he said, his voice rough. Especially a Xilari princess and a human in a wrecked ship. Elias raised his hands. Before you start shooting, we're just passing through. The mercenary chuckled. Passing through. With Draxar on your tail. Virel stood firm. We need transport off this planet. If you help us, you will be rewarded. The mercenary smirked. Rewarded, huh? You Xilari always talk big. But the Draxar are paying more for your capture. At his signal, the mercenaries raised their weapons. Elias sighed. I knew this was going to happen. Fight or surrender. Virel didn't wait. She moved like lightning, her energy blade igniting as she slashed through the nearest mercenary's weapon. Sparks flew, and the mercenary staggered back, stunned. Elias ducked, grabbing a discarded metal pipe and swinging it into another mercenary's legs. The man crashed to the ground, groaning. Not bad for a human, Virel muttered. Not bad for a princess. Elias shot back. More mercenaries rushed them. One fired a plasma shot at Virel, but she dodged effortlessly, her blade cutting through the weapon's barrel. Elias grabbed a fallen blaster and fired back, forcing them to take cover. The mercenary leader growled. Enough of this. He pulled out a shock grenade and hurled it toward them. Virel's eyes widened. Move. The grenade detonated midair, sending a shockwave through the platform. Elias and Virel were thrown backward, crashing against a supply crate. Elias coughed. That hurt. Virel struggled to stand, her vision blurry. The mercenaries closed in, weapons aimed. Looks like you lost, the leader sneered. But before he could pull the trigger, a deafening roar filled the air. The mercenaries froze. A massive shadow loomed over them from the darkness. Red eyes glowed, reflecting the dim lights of the port. Then, the creature attacked. An unexpected ally. The mercenaries screamed as the beast tore into them. It moved like a storm, huge claws slashing, fangs snapping. One mercenary fired his rifle, but the shot barely slowed it down. Elias and Virel watched in shock. What is that? Elias muttered. Virel's eyes narrowed. A Sirek, a predator from the deep worlds. The Sirek finished the last mercenary, then turned to them. Its breath was heavy, and its sharp teeth dripped with energy residue. Virel stood her ground, gripping her blade. If it attacks, we must be ready. But the Sirek did not attack. Instead, it lowered its head slightly, as if acknowledging them. Elias blinked. Wait, is it helping us? Virel hesitated. This didn't make sense. The Sirek were wild creatures, hunters, yet this one had protected them. Before she could respond, the Sirek let out a low growl and motioned toward the far end of the port. Elias looked in the direction it pointed. There, hidden behind old containers, a ship. Virel's heart raced. A way out. Elias grinned. I think our new friend wants us to leave. The Sirek growled again, stepping aside. Virel exchanged a glance with Elias. This was their only chance. Let's go, she said. They ran toward the ship, leaving the burning wreckage of the mercenary camp behind. But as they reached the ramp, Virel glanced back. The Sirek watched them, its glowing red eyes unreadable. Then, without a sound, it turned and disappeared into the shadows. Elias hit the controls, and the ship's engines roared to life. As they lifted off the ground, breaking through the clouds, Virel couldn't shake a strange feeling. The Draxar were still out there. Their fight wasn't over. But for now, they had survived. And for the first time, she wondered if this human, this Elias, was more than just a nuisance. Maybe, just maybe, he was her destiny. The ship's engines roared as it blasted off the landing platform, leaving the burning wreckage of the spaceport behind. Inside the cockpit, Elias gripped the controls, his fingers dancing across the console as he pushed the damaged ship to its limits. Virel sat beside him, her eyes locked on the scanner. We need to leave the planet's orbit before the Draxar reinforcements arrive, she said, her voice tense. Elias smirked. Oh, so now we're working together. She shot him a glare, but didn't argue. Just fly. The ship shook violently as they broke through the atmosphere, the hull creaking under the pressure. Warning lights flashed across the control panel. Shields at 40%. Elias muttered. Engines barely holding together. We won't last long in a fight. Virel checked the scanner again. The Draxar ship is approaching fast. Elias cursed under his breath. Of course they are. A deadly pursuit. A red light flashed on the control panel. Incoming fire. The ship jolted as laser blasts struck the rear hull. Sparks flew inside the cockpit. They're locking weapons, Virel warned. Elias gritted his teeth. Hang on. He yanked the controls hard, sending the ship into a sharp roll. The Draxar vessel overshot them, missing its next shot by inches. Virel activated the targeting system. We have a few missiles left. Elias glanced at her. Then what are you waiting for? She fired. The missiles streaked through space, slamming into the Draxar ship's left wing. The explosion ripped through its armor, sending it spinning. But it wasn't enough. The Draxar vessel recovered quickly, still in pursuit. They're too fast, Elias muttered. We need another plan. Virel's fingers flew over the console. There's an asteroid field nearby. If we reach it, we can lose them. Elias raised an eyebrow. Flying into a death trap. Sounds fun. Just do it. Into the asteroids. Elias pushed the thrusters to maximum. The ship shot forward, racing toward the dense asteroid field. Behind them, the Draxar ship followed closely, weapons still firing. Huge chunks of rock drifted in space, some spinning dangerously fast. This is insane, Elias muttered as he maneuvered between the asteroids, barely dodging a massive chunk of metal. The Draxar ship wasn't as lucky. One of its wings clipped an asteroid, sending it into an uncontrolled spin. Virel saw her chance. Fire now. Elias didn't hesitate. He pressed the trigger, launching the last missile. It hit the Draxar ship dead center. The explosion lit up the asteroid field, and the Draxar ship broke apart in a fiery blast. Elias exhaled. Finally. Virel checked the scanner. No other ships in range. We're safe for now. Elias leaned back in his seat, exhausted. So, what now, Princess? She hesitated. Now, we talk. Revealing the truth. The ship drifted in the quiet of space, its engines humming softly. Elias turned to Virel. All right. No more running. No more fighting. Tell me the truth. Why are the Draxar hunting you? Virel was silent for a moment. Then she sighed. Because I refuse to follow my people's tradition. Elias frowned. Tradition. She looked away. As a Xilari princess, my fate was decided at birth. I was supposed to be married off to an ally. An arranged bond to keep peace between our species. Elias raised an eyebrow. Let me guess. You said no. She nodded. I refused. I wanted to choose my own path. The Draxar saw it as an insult. They wanted me to marry one of their warlords to secure an alliance. When I refused, they declared me a traitor. Elias exhaled. That's why they're chasing you. She clenched her fists. Yes, and now, because of me, you are involved in this mess. Elias leaned back, thinking. So you don't want to be forced into a life you never chose. Virel met his gaze. I would rather die than be a prisoner to fate. Elias smirked. Yeah, I can respect that. She tilted her head. You understand. He shrugged. Humans don't like being told what to do either. We fight for our choices, our freedom. For the first time, Virel smiled. A small, genuine smile. Then maybe, she said softly, we are not so different after all. A new mission. The moment of peace didn't last long. The console beeped, an incoming transmission. Virel frowned. It's from my people. Elias sighed. This can't be good. She activated the communicator. A hologram flickered to life, revealing an older auxiliary male in royal armor. His face was stern, his eyes cold. Princess Virel, he said, you have been running for too long. It is time to come home. Virel's grip tightened on the console. I will not be forced into a marriage. The man's expression didn't change. Then return and face judgment. The Draxar are demanding your capture. If you do not surrender, our peace treaty will collapse. War will begin. Elias and Virel exchanged a look. Elias crossed his arms. So either you give up your freedom, or your people go to war. The man's gaze shifted to Elias. And you, human, stay out of this. This is not your fight. Elias smirked. Too late for that. Virel took a deep breath. I will not return as a prisoner. The auxiliary noble sighed. Then you leave us no choice. The transmission cut off. The ship's scanners blared with warning signals. Multiple ships, auxiliary warships, were approaching fast. Elias groaned. I really hate politics. Virel's expression hardened. We have only one option left. Elias raised an eyebrow. Which is? She turned to him, her voice firm. We fight. The warning alarm screamed inside the ship as the auxiliary warships appeared on the radar. 6 heavily armed vessels surrounded them from all directions. Their sleek silver hulls gleamed against the darkness of space, their weapons locking onto Elias and Virel's small damaged ship. Elias let out a low whistle. Well, that's not good. Virel's fingers hovered over the controls, her jaw clenched. They won't let us leave. If they capture me, they'll force the marriage or execute me for defying their rule. Elias exhaled. And if we refuse? She glanced at him. They'll open fire. Elias smirked. Guess we're out of good options. The ship's communicator crackled to life, and a deep voice echoed through the cockpit. Princess Virel, this is your final warning. Power down your ship and surrender. If you resist, we will destroy you. Virel tightened her grip on the controls. I won't go back. Elias leaned back. All right, Princess. What's the plan? She hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath. We fight. Elias grinned. Now you're talking. Outnumbered and outgunned. The auxiliary warships moved into attack formation, their cannons glowing with charged energy. Virel activated the shields. They're waiting for our surrender. Elias cracked his knuckles. Then let's give them a surprise. He yanked the controls, sending their ship into a sudden dive. The auxiliary ships hesitated for a second, just long enough for Elias to fire their last 2 torpedoes. Boom! One of the enemy ships exploded in a fiery blast, debris scattering through space. But the others were still there, and they weren't hesitating anymore. A barrage of plasma fire streaked toward them. Hold on, Elias shouted as he twisted the ship into a sharp roll, barely dodging the incoming fire. Virel's fingers danced over the console. We can't win in a direct fight. We need an escape route. Elias glanced at the navigation screen. A nebula was nearby, a swirling mass of gas and charged particles. That nebula, he said. We go in. Virel frowned. Are you insane? That cloud is filled with radiation and storms. Elias smirked. Exactly. They won't risk following us in. Virel hesitated, then nodded. Then let's do it. Into the storm. The ship darted toward the nebula, its engines roaring. Behind them, the Xilari warships fired relentlessly, their cannons blazing. The shields flickered as they absorbed multiple hits. The ship shook violently. Shields at 15%. Virel shouted. Elias pushed the engines to their limit, and the ship shot into the swirling clouds of the nebula. Immediately, the cockpit lights flickered, and static filled the screens. Virel checked the readings. Electromagnetic interference. We won't be able to see them, but they won't be able to track us either. Elias grinned. Perfect. Outside, the nebula was a storm of lightning and radiation, tendrils of energy coursing through space. Behind them, the Xilari warships halted at the edge of the cloud, unwilling to risk their systems getting fried. We did it, Virel said, exhaling. They won't follow us in. Elias leaned back. Told you I had a plan. She turned to him. That was reckless. You could have gotten us killed. Elias smirked. Yeah, but we're still here, aren't we? She sighed, shaking her head, but there was a hint of admiration in her eyes. The heart of the matter. As the ship drifted deeper into the nebula, the adrenaline began to fade. For the first time since their escape, there was silence. Virel glanced at Elias. You didn't have to do this. You could have left me back there. Elias shrugged. Not really my style. Besides, you deserve a choice in your own life. She studied him for a moment. Humans really are different. He smirked. Took you long enough to figure that out. She shook her head, but a small smile touched her lips. What now? Elias stretched. Well, we can't stay in this nebula forever. But if we go back out, your people will still be waiting. Virel's expression hardened. Then we end this. No more running. Elias raised an eyebrow. End it how? She took a deep breath. There's only one way to stop this war from happening. I have to confront my father. Elias whistled. You sure about that? Sounds risky. Virel nodded. If I don't, thousands of lives will be lost. I won't let my people suffer because of me. Elias leaned back, thinking. All right, princess. Looks like we're going home. She looked at him, determination in her eyes. Together. He grinned. Together. As the ship turned back toward the Xilari homeworld, a storm of possibilities awaited. But one thing was clear. This was far from over. The Xilari homeworld loomed ahead, its dark, swirling clouds casting an ominous glow over the towering cities below. The royal palace sat at the heart of it all, a fortress of metal and stone, heavily guarded by soldiers in shining armor. Inside their ship, Elias and Virel stood side by side, staring at the planet growing larger on the screen. You really think your father will listen? Elias asked. Virel took a deep breath. I don't know, but I have to try. Elias cracked his knuckles. And if he doesn't? Virel's violet eyes burned with determination. Then I'll find another way to stop this war. Landing in the lion's den. As soon as their ship entered the atmosphere, warning sirens blared. Xilari fighters flanked them, guiding them toward the palace landing pad. Soldiers surrounded them the moment they stepped out. Princess Virel, one of the guards announced, his voice cold. You are under arrest for treason. Virel stood tall, her chin high. Take me to my father. The guards hesitated, then escorted them inside. The palace halls were silent and tense. Finally, they reached the throne room. King Zorath, a towering figure draped in regal robes, sat on his throne. His piercing golden eyes locked onto Varel. "You dare return?" His voice rumbled through the chamber. "After running away with a human." Varel did not flinch. "I return because this war is pointless. I refuse to be a pawn in your games." Zorath's expression darkened. "You disgrace our bloodline." Elias stepped forward, smirking. "Hey, nice to meet you too, Your Highness." The king's eyes narrowed. "You, the human who poisoned my daughter's mind." Elias crossed his arms. "Pretty sure she made her own choices." Varel clenched her fists. "Father, listen to me. The war with humans will not bring us honor. It will bring destruction." Zorath's gaze turned cold. "Honor demands sacrifice." Varel's voice rose. "Sacrifice for what? So you can force me into a marriage I don't want. So you can crush a people who have done nothing wrong." Zorath stood, his power radiating through the room. "You forget your place." Varel took a deep breath. "No, for the first time, I know my place, and it is not as a tool for war." The turning point. The room fell into a heavy silence. Zorath's expression remained unreadable. Then he slowly walked down the steps of his throne until he stood before her. "You speak with fire," he said, "but fire alone cannot change fate." Elias stepped up beside Varel. "Maybe not, but choices can." Zorath's gaze shifted between them. "What do you propose?" Varel's heart pounded. "End the war. Let me choose my own path." The king studied her, his face unreadable. Then he turned to Elias. "And you? Would you stand beside her, even against an empire?" Elias met his gaze without hesitation. "Yeah. No question." For the first time, something changed in Zorath's eyes. Then he turned away. "Guards, leave us." The soldiers obeyed, vanishing through the doors. When they were alone, Zorath spoke again. "For centuries, our people believed strength was the only truth, that we must conquer or be conquered." He sighed, a deep, weary sound. "Perhaps we were wrong." Varel's breath caught. "You mean?" Zorath closed his eyes for a moment. Then he looked at her. "I will call for peace." Relief flooded Varel's chest. "Father." He raised a hand. "But know this, your choice will change everything. You will no longer be heir to the throne. You will walk a path unknown to our kind." Varel stood tall. "I accept that." Zorath's gaze softened, just a little. "Then go. The future is yours to make." A new beginning. Outside the palace, the sky was clear. No sirens, no warships, just the open horizon. Elias exhaled. "That went better than expected." Varel smiled. "You doubted me." He grinned. "Never." As they walked back toward their ship, the weight of everything settled in. She had left behind her title, her throne, her old life. But as she looked at Elias, she knew she had gained something far greater. "Where to now?" Elias asked. She smiled. "Anywhere we want." With that, they boarded the ship and soared into the stars, toward a future they would shape together.